You've probably heard that Rome wasn't built in a day, but what no one tells you is that it also wasn't destroyed in a single day. It was built, expanded, nearly lost, and reinvented in the hands of men who saw the world in a way completely different from most people. And here's a statement that might make you uncomfortable. The story of Rome is not about battles. It's not about gladiators. It's not about blood in the arena. It's about power, strategy, and the ability of a few individuals to bend reality to their will. 5 men in particular changed not only Rome, but the entire course of Western civilization, and chances are you barely know half of what they actually did. Most people know the name Julius Caesar, but they don't realize that his death produced the exact opposite of what his assassins intended. They vaguely know Augustus, but they don't understand the brilliant political maneuver he used to control everything while making it appear that he controlled nothing. And Constantine? He changed the religion of the entire world and did it after a decision made on the eve of a battle. What did these men have that made them so different? What did they understand about leadership, strategy, and human behavior that placed them at the top of one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen? That is exactly what you are about to discover, and I guarantee that some of it will surprise you in ways you did not expect. And if you enjoy this kind of content, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss any of these stories. So settle in, because this story is about to begin. Rome in the 1st century BC was not yet an empire. It was a republic on fire. The Senate was rotten from within, corroded by corruption and rivalries between generals who accumulated more power than any law could contain. Julius Caesar did not emerge in this environment as a savior. He emerged as a man who saw, with unsettling clarity, that the system was broken, and that whoever dared to act first could take everything. And that is exactly what he did. Between 58 and 50 BC, he led the conquest of Gaul with a level of military mastery that is still studied today, bringing vast territories, unimaginable wealth, and a prestige that no senator could ignore any longer. The moment that divided history into before and after happened on the bank of a river in 49 BC. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his legions, something forbidden by Roman law, he knew exactly what he was doing. Alea jacta est, he said. The die was cast. That crossing was not just a military decision, it was a declaration that the old rules no longer applied to a man of his stature. The civil war against Pompey that followed was brutal, but Caesar emerged victorious, and with that victory came reforms that shook Rome from its center to its edges. The Julian calendar, which organized time so efficiently that it remained in use for centuries. Administrative centralization, the expansion of the Senate, and social changes that reshaped the city's power structure. The ironic and at the same time fascinating part is that the senators who assassinated Caesar in 44 BC on the Ides of March believed they were saving the Republic. They were completely mistaken. His death did not erase what he had built. On the contrary, it ignited a chain of events that would push Rome directly toward empire. Because when you destroy a man who has already changed the system does not move backward, it moves forward. And that very advance, this next chapter of Roman history, reveals something even more astonishing about how power can be exercised in a way that very few people, even today, have truly understood how to do. If Caesar was the man who destroyed the Republic, Augustus was the genius who built something entirely new on top of its ruins, and he did it in such an intelligent way that most people didn't even realize what was happening. He did not call himself king, nor did he call himself dictator. He called himself princeps, the first citizen. He kept the Senate functioning, preserved the appearance of the Republic, and at the same time accumulated titles and powers in a way that placed everything in his hands: consul, tribune, and pontifex maximus. It was an empire in practice, dressed in the clothing of a republic, and that was perhaps the most brilliant political move in ancient history. Augustus understood something that few leaders truly grasp: power without structure collapses. That's why he reorganized the Roman army into 28 professional legions, where every soldier knew that at the end of his service he would receive a retirement reward, and that financial loyalty translated directly into loyalty to the emperor. But he went beyond the battlefield. Augustus used culture as a political weapon. He funded poets like Virgil and Horace to build an imperial narrative, a shared identity for Rome. This is not very different from what major brands do today. Apple, for example, doesn't just sell products, it sells a vision of the world. Augustus essentially did the same thing with an entire empire. The legacy he left has both a name and duration: the Pax Romana. Nearly 200 years of relative stability from 27 BC to AD 180, during which trade flourished, roads expanded, and Rome reached a level of organization that the Western world would not see again for a long time. But building peace is one thing. Expanding an empire to its absolute limits is something entirely different. And that is exactly what the next great Caesar set out to do, pushing Rome's borders farther than any emperor had ever done before. Trajan broke a pattern that Rome had carried for centuries, and that alone would already make him extraordinary. He was not born in Rome, he was not the son of a senator, and he did not come from the traditional families that dominated imperial politics. He came from Hispania, what we now call Spain, and his rise to power said something profound about what Rome had become: no longer just a city ruling the world, but an multicultural empire where merit and competence carried more weight than a family name. This detail may seem small, but it changes everything about how we understand the evolution of great structures of power over time. On the battlefield, Trajan was relentless. His campaign against King Decibellus in Dacia, a region that today corresponds to Romania, became one of the most profitable military victories in Roman history. The gold mines seized there poured immense wealth into the imperial treasury, funding monuments, public works, and games that kept the Roman people satisfied and the emperor immensely popular. Trajan's column, erected in Rome to celebrate this victory, still stands today, and anyone visiting the city can see it with their own eyes, as if time had frozen that moment of glory. After Dacia, he pushed even further. His eastern campaigns carried the Roman legions all the way to Mesopotamia and the shores of the Persian Gulf, the farthest point Rome would ever reach. The Roman Senate had a phrase that perfectly captured Trajan's reputation, a kind of benchmark used to measure every emperor who came after him. "May you be more fortunate than Augustus and better than Trajan." Think about that. His name became synonymous with the highest standard of excellence in the exercise of power. But here's the question few people ask. What happens when an empire reaches its limit, when there is no more territory left to conquer, when the borders become too vast to defend, and when crises begin knocking at the door? The answer to that question would come centuries later, in the hands of a man who did not conquer new lands, but instead saved Rome from itself. The 3rd century was, without exaggeration, the most chaotic period Rome had ever experienced. Runaway inflation, barbarian invasions pressing on the borders from every direction, civil wars erupting at an absurd pace, and emperors being assassinated with an almost embarrassing frequency. In less than 50 years, Rome had more than 20 different emperors. The empire that Augustus had built so carefully, that Trajan had expanded to its greatest extent, was literally tearing itself apart from within. At that moment, Rome did not need a conqueror. It needed someone courageous enough to make unpopular decisions and completely redesign the system. Diocletian was that man. His solution was so radical that historians still debate whether it was a stroke of genius or a desperate patch, but the fact is, it worked. He created the Tetrarchy, a system in which the empire was ruled by 4 leaders simultaneously, each responsible for a different region, divide in order to govern on a scale no one had ever attempted before. In addition, he reorganized the army, multiplied the number of provinces to make administration easier, and fortified the borders in a way that transformed Rome into something like a military superstate. It was bureaucratic and heavy, but it was functional, and functional was exactly what Rome needed to survive. The most remarkable detail about Diocletian's story, however, is not any of his reforms. It's what he did in AD 305. He voluntarily abdicated power, the first Roman emperor in history to do so. While most powerful men cling to power until death, Diocletian chose to step down and retire to cultivate his own garden in Dalmatia, and when former colleagues later came to beg him to return to the throne, he reportedly responded with calm indifference. Rome had been saved from collapse, but the next great Caesar would change something far deeper than borders or systems of government. He would change the very soul of the empire. In AD 312, on the eve of a battle that would determine the fate of Rome, Constantine had a vision, or at least that's what he claimed to the world. A cross in the sky, accompanied by the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign you will conquer." Whether it was a genuine mystical experience or a carefully calculated political move executed with surgical precision, the fact is that Constantine entered the Battle of the Milvian Bridge with the Christian symbol on the shields of his troops and emerged from it as the most powerful man in the empire. And what followed that victory became one of the most impactful turning points in human history, not only for Rome, but for the entire Western world. The following year, in AD 313, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting religious freedom throughout the empire and bringing centuries of persecution against Christians to an end. But he did not stop there. In AD 325, he convened the Council of Nicaea, gathering bishops from across the empire to define Christian doctrine and combat heresies, and for the first time in history, a Roman emperor was directly interfering in the theology of a religion. Think about the weight of that moment. The same kind of power that once built roads and commanded legions was now deciding what would or would not be considered spiritual truth for millions of people. This fusion between political and religious authority shaped the Western world in ways that we still feel today. And as if that were not enough, Constantine also founded Constantinople in AD 330, in a location of extraordinary strategic brilliance, at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, where control of trade and military routes was unmatched. This city not only survived the fall of Rome, but kept the Eastern Roman Empire standing for more than 1,000 years afterward. Constantine did not merely rule an empire, he reshaped the architecture of the world itself. And now that you know the 5 Caesars who shaped Rome, one question is worth keeping in mind. What did these men have in common that set them apart from all the others? And after all of this, one question still hangs in the air. What do Julius Caesar, Augustus, Trajan, Diocletian, and Constantine have in common? Each of them, in their own way, recognized what needed to be done when the world around them was in chaos, and they acted. They didn't wait for the perfect moment, they didn't ask for permission, and they didn't hesitate in the face of the impossible. And that raises a reflection that goes far beyond ancient Rome. How many times have you chosen not to act because the moment didn't seem right? How many important decisions were left waiting while time kept moving forward? The story of Rome is, at its core, a mirror. And what you see in it says a lot about who you are. Which of these 5 Caesars do you think had the greatest impact on history? Julius Caesar, who destroyed the Republic? Augustus, who built the empire? Trajan, who pushed Rome to its greatest territorial extent? Diocletian, who saved everything when it seemed ready to collapse? Or Constantine, who changed the very soul of the Western world? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to know what you think, and I'm sure the discussion will be a good one. And if you made it this far, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's much more history waiting for you here.